Hi everybody, we're back again. I hope everybody's staying safe, using their hand sanitizer, wearing their masks in public, staying out of crowds, doing everything they can to protect themselves from the pandemic. Rekha Rajani had asked me specifically to share this with you. There's another place you can go on the web to see some of the things I've read. George helped me read the Risho and Kokoran, and also the selection of time. Also, there's a bunch of dictionary definitions. So it's real easy if you want to remember this. I can't really give you a link because there's all kinds of letters and dashes. But if you just Google Nichiren Buddhism and Soka Philosophy Study Meeting, you'll
on
get
YouTube.
On YouTube. Well, or you can Google it. You can Google it and it'll take you to YouTube. It's the third one down if you Google it. It's the first one if you do it in the YouTube search bar. But this, and then also don't forget that, again, we have a Facebook group that is a private group, and anybody can ask to join it, and nobody will be refused. And let me see, what else was I going to try and think before I get started here? I wanted to say hi to all my friends that aren't here. Anik, Rio, Zoe, Catherine, Amy, Sling, Mr. Lee, again, thank you for chanting Daimoku with us. I assume that you were doing that. You reduced me to tears today, sir, my brother. I was actually crying over your question because it was so profound to me that you had been the one that had asked it. I will dedicate a full... I'm not going to even go there tonight because it's too important a question that you asked. But my good friends, my personal friends, Ari and my brother Weird Michael and Desi, I'm glad to know you guys are still with us. Arekha and Joe and Jackie and Marilyn and Faye, everybody. I'm going to try and get into this as quickly as possible. Last week I had said something about, do understand that when we're doing gongyo, we're not praising the Lotus Sutra. We don't disparage the Lotus Sutra, but that was for the former and the middle day of the law, and the Buddhism of sowing is what we're supposed to be practicing in the latter day, right? So when we do gongyo, we're not praising the Lotus Sutra or praising Shakyamuni in reality. We are actually acknowledging the correct perspective of the Lotus Sutra as qualified by the Daishonin for the latter day. So I'm going to read you, and this has been diminished so much that I couldn't find it without searching harder because I know it's there. I got this from Soka Spirit to be able to read it to you. I couldn't find it just plainly visible on gongyo as an SGI subject, and I went to Nichiren Shoshu, where that's where you would assume that it would for sure be, because this is something that came from Nichikan Shonin, and it's not there either. So here we go. I'm going to read you what's really going on when we do Nyose So, Nyose Sho, when we do the 10 factors 3 times, and what we're really doing when we're doing gongyo. According to, what we do when we do gongyo is we refute and borrow, and then we refute and use. And it's the Shakyamuni first 14 chapters and the last 14 chapters, which is called Honman, right? It says, according to Nichiren's successors, Nikko and Nichikan, the purpose of reciting the expedient means chapter is to refute and borrow. And the purpose of reciting the lifespan chapter is to refute and use. The expedient means chapter, particularly in its portions on the true aspect of all phenomena and the 10 factors containing the teaching of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, which is what we were talking about last week, which is why I brought this up. Shakyamuni, however, has not yet in the sutra revealed his eternal Buddhahood. Remember, this is chapter 2, and he doesn't do that until chapter 16. And instead expounds this teaching in his provisional identity as someone who attained Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree. That's the whole thing about the first 14 chapters. That's why they're Shakyamuni and not Honman, because he's not revealed the truth of his life and eternal Buddhahood. Right? Do you understand? You're with me? Okay. So he says, Shakyamuni, however, has not yet in the sutra revealed his eternal Buddhahood, and instead expounds his teachings in his provisional identity. We recite the expedient means chapter then to refute its teaching based on our understanding of Nichiren Buddhism and the fact that we are all eternally thus come once. All right? It says, then the lifespan chapter substitutes the teaching of expedient means in which Shakyamuni's true identity as an eternal Buddha is revealed. So we recite the expedient means chapter to borrow its passages to reveal the essential teaching of the lifespan chapter in terms of both the surface meaning and the implicit meaning, because the Buddhism of harvest is what's on the surface and the Buddhism of sowing is what's implicit, okay? So it says, for this reason, we recite the lifespan chapter to refute its teachings from the standpoint of Nichiren Buddhism. At the same time, we use the chapter to reveal the eternal law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo implicit in its text. To sum up, we make use of the Lotus Sutra through our understanding of Nichiren Buddhism, based on which we refute the expedient means chapter for being expounded by Shakyamuni and is a provisional identity, which is not a true teaching because it's not his true identity. And we refute the lifespan chapter for expounding only the Buddhism of harvest and not the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay? So that, I hope, helped clarify why we're doing gongyo. All right. Last week, and again, now I'll close this. So something else happened last week is that we got attacked by devilish functions with one of the cameras going down. And so George got faced with getting home ready to put everything on YouTube and had to do watermark comments and so forth. So unfortunately, if you watched last week's video on Facebook, you saw it correctly because I specifically had given a lot of reference material on the first part. And we thought it would be enough to just mark them 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. And because 2 of 2 got put down first, people weren't paying attention to that. And so as of now, there's still over 20 people that watched 2 of 2 and not 1 of 2. So they didn't get any of the preference material that I needed, really, I felt you really needed to understand thoroughly. And then also, 2 of 2 got marked as dictionary definitions. And they're really not dictionary definitions. Do you remember what I actually read last week? It was only 2 dictionary definitions. The other one was from the orally transmitted teachings, and that's a little bit higher level than dictionary definition. And I also wanted to qualify before we start reading, because this is all important. I'm going to go into all of this so that you can all understand all of this to the best of my ability to explain it. So this is going to take weeks, just playing off of this chapter alone, because I'll end up going back to the expedient means and the lifespan chapters in the Lotus Sutra and the orally transmitted teachings to help explain and confirm what President Toda has said here. And basically what I'm going to be reading to you, I went back to the Lectures on the Sutra by Josei Toda, and I realize now it's not as easy to read. This is saying exactly what it says, but it's been updated. It's been retranslated, actually. He's got Miyaroku and all kinds of stuff in there, So at any rate. But going into last week, the thing that I wanted to make sure everybody understood was this issue of the Buddhism of harvest and versus the Buddhism of sowing. And so I will continue on with this, but we will be discussing this as we go forward for the next several weeks, actually. So going back to the Human Revolution from page 848. Now this was marked 2 of 2, and it just gives it's just titled The Prime Point, which is why probably a lot of people jumped on reading it, because it's a very inviting kind of title. But this is actually from Book 2, Chapter 7 of that particular volume 7 of that particular book. So here we go. I'm going to start again on page 848 and read it straight through. We are now going to study the expedient means, and this is a little bit of a dip back into last week for continuity's sake. But anybody that didn't see 2 of 2 last week, please, you gotta go back and see 2 of 2. Don't leave that unsaid. The reality is that much of what you'll understand about Buddhism is going to come from the dictionary, whether you understand that or not, because many of the people that will teach you about Buddhism are not capable of actually giving you the actual correct understanding. I have most of my understanding from going back and actually focusing on what the real people that understand doctrine say. And this is the cleanest way to understand it because it's been done, again, without theology involved. It's really open source. It's really based on all credible sources. And it helps you understand Nichiren Buddhism from the perspective that we practice it as SGI members. Okay, so this is never just a lot of extraneous explanation. This is actually, every time you read any definition in here, you'll understand it differently. The more you read the same definition over and over and over again, the more you'll understand that definition completely differently than you did the first time you read it. That's the beauty of this. It's read for the advancement of your faith. Because as your faith advances, your capacity to understand clearly and correctly also changes. It advances. It's not the same. It doesn't stay static. What one thing said to you 10 years ago, you'll read again, and it says something much deeper, much more clear to you. Oh, I missed that little nuance. These are all the ways we grow personally. That's why they're there for us. They're absolutely essential. Don't ever skip them thinking they're extraneous or that you already know what's in here. You don't. How many times? You could read this 15 times and you wouldn't know what's in here. I guarantee you. Okay, so going back to 848. Starting on the second, this chapter, guys, we are now going to study the expedient means and lifespan chapters. I ask you to remember always that the essence of the Daishonin's lecture lies in this portion, lifespan of the Thus Come One chapter of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the chapter 16 of the orally transmitted teachings. Why did the Daishonin take the trouble of adding Nam to the original title, which reads Lifespan of the Thus Come One chapter of Myoho Renge-kyo? Because by doing so, the Daishonin is telling us that this is the most important part of his teaching, because this is where he qualifies himself to be the eternal Buddha, actually. Or one with the eternal Buddha, which we all are. The eternal Buddha being life itself. By doing so, the Daishonin is telling us that this is the most important part of his teachings. When Nam is included, the Thus Come One indicates Nam-myoho Renge-kyo Thus Come One. That is, the Buddha hidden between the lines of the lifespan chapter. Without Nam, Thus Come One means only the Buddha on the level of Shakyamuni's Buddhism. It is now clear that the Daishonin's idea of Thus Come One is entirely different from that of Shakyamuni. Thus, the mere addition of this short prefix Nam causes a revolutionary change in the concept of Thus Come One. You may think it troublesome to distinguish between the two kinds of Thus Come Ones. Pardon me. But this trouble is worth taking only because... You may think it troublesome to distinguish between the two kinds of Thus Come Ones, but this trouble is worth taking because only then can you reach the exact truth of Buddhist philosophy. Once you accurately grasp that essence, you will be able to absorb the whole of the Daishonin's teachings in one broad, unobstructed view. Now, what is that paragraph referring to? You may think it troublesome to distinguish between the two kinds of Thus Come Ones. What are the two kinds of Thus Come Ones? I just read it in the previous paragraph. That's why I'm challenging you to stay with me as I talk, to understand with a seeking spirit what I'm saying, because I'm trying to share something with you that's really important for you to understand. Okay? So what are the two kinds of Thus Come Ones? There's the Thus Come One from Buddhism of Harvest, which is Shakyamuni, and various Buddhas he qualifies that are emanations of himself. Okay? And then there's the Thus Come One from the Lotus Sutra that's qualified in the Buddhism of Harvest, which is everybody. And who qualified that Thus Come One from the Buddhism of Harvest is really all living beings? Tiantai. Okay? But it didn't qualify how or why. Okay? Understand that. Only the Buddhism of Harvest, the Buddhism of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, explains what Tentai theoretically expressed in the Makashikan. This is the whole point. Okay? So there are two kinds of Buddhas. There's a theoretical Buddha, okay, and there's an actual Buddha. All right? Do you understand? Theoretical Buddha is expressed in the Shakyamun teaching, the actual Buddha of living life in the Sahe world, as a person of the 9 worlds, expressing the 10th world in your present form. That's actual Buddhahood. Okay? So you may think it troublesome to distinguish between the Buddhism of the harvest and the Buddhism of sowing. He's saying the two kinds of thus come once. But this trouble is worth taking, because only then can you reach the exact truth of Buddhist philosophy. Only when you take into the expression of faith based on Nichiren's understanding and the Buddhism of sowing does everything become in one fast fell swoop. You understand everything Shakyamuni was trying to say. I can now. I mean, I can't wait to read the Lotus Sutra to you, because it finally expresses something that's understandable to me. And that's not something that occurred until really kind of recently. All right? Once you accurately grasp that essence, you will be able to absorb the whole of the Daishonin's teachings in one broad, unobstructed view. So that's what you should be shooting for, is to understand this from the perspective of the Buddhism of sowing. Don't waste your time trying to find some mystical, deep, correct understanding in the Lotus Sutra. It is a waste of your time. That was then, this is now. Please trust me on that. I've already checked. I've already looked. If you don't believe me, you can go look yourself. The Daishonin tried qualifying that. That's what his whole teaching is. You can spend all kinds of time trying to master something that is a lesser teaching than the one you're actually embracing just by chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Do you understand? Please, it's very important. Since lifespan means to measure the benefits of the Buddhas plural, lifespan of the Thus Come One chapter of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo indicates the benefits of the original Buddha, to whom reference is made between the lines of the lifespan chapter. If you read the expedient means and lifespan chapters in this light, you will begin to understand as clear as day the invaluable principles these chapters hold. All people, no matter to what erroneous schools they may belong, would recognize the distinct difference between the Daishonin's Buddhism and that of Shakyamuni if they would only study the record of the orally transmitted teachings, which only exists in Nikko's school, in IKKO's school, Nichiren Shoshu, with all earnestness and sincerity. And actually, however, they fail to sense this difference. Why? Because they do not have the Gohonzon. And this goes back to Mr. Lee's new question, which I'll answer after we're done with all this. Thus, the addition of Nam to the original title produces a diametrical difference between Nichiren Buddhism and other schools, which would also be referenced in that expression that I just talked about from Soka's spirit. Do you understand that? Refute and borrow and refute and use, correct? Explaining every word and phrase in simple language, Toda was now approaching his conclusion. The record of the orally transmitted teachings continues. Therefore, the original Buddha, with the three enlightened bodies, is the votary of the Lotus Sutra of the latter day of the law. And as I expressed to you, we are exactly that Buddha when we're living as bodhisattvas of the earth. Right? When we live as bodhisattvas of the earth, we are living as living Buddhas. Do you understand? But we're in the 9 worlds with all the other 9 world entities, and that's why we appear to be bodhisattvas. In truth, the truth that we're embracing for that purpose qualifies us as already having attained Buddhahood. Understand? I don't know if you do, but you will by the time I'm done reading. The record of the orally transmitted teachings continues. Therefore, the original Buddha with the 3 enlightened bodies is the votary of the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law. This is the most crucial point, and that's why I say it over and over and over again, because if you don't get this, then you don't understand the point. It's really, you can understand this theoretically, but if it doesn't hit you here so that you really understand everybody is this, then you still didn't understand it. The true Buddha can be identified as human life itself, an entity that is no one's creation. Again, Kuan is not a finite point. It can never be found. There's no creation to Kuan. If we're all entities of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, then we have no beginning. We have no end. We have never been created. That's the thing that this is saying. Nichiren Daishonin asserts that the true Buddha manifests himself as a votary of the Lotus Sutra in the latter day. That's what each one of us, including him, which is what opened the way and started all this, is right now as we express ourselves through this teaching, his teaching. Do you understand? The Daishonin is clearly referring to himself in this phrase, a definite statement that is beyond all ambiguity. And all of his statements in the OTT also express this as beyond ambiguity as it relates to us as well, equally to him. The record of the orally transmitted teachings, other than he's the original teacher and we're all his disciples. The record of the orally transmitted teachings further states the honorific title of the original Buddha with the three enlightened bodies is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This passage exactly fits with the foregoing phrase, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, thus come one. This Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is no one else but Nichiren Daishonin himself, as a human being of correct faith. As the record of orally transmitted teachings teaches, this forms the basis of the three important matters expounded in the lifespan chapter. So during my lecture, President Toda is saying, as I continue to read for these next 10 pages, always bear in mind that thus come one, as used in the title of the lifespan chapter, indicates the Buddha expounded between the lines of the lifespan chapter, that is, the original Buddha or Nichiren Daishonin himself, who has qualified in the orally transmitted teachings that we are all exactly equal to him. Those of us that embrace faith in the same manner that he has, that embrace his teaching exactly in the same mind as him, have no separation between us and him. Okay? So even though he is the original Buddha or Nichiren Daishonin himself as the original teacher, we are the original disciples. Do you understand that? Okay? Because that life condition that he expressed for the first time that had never been expressed before in the Sahe world is the life condition that is the original state. It's Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. It's without beginning and it's without end. Toda, and this is where I left off last week. Toda paused for a sip of water, then immediately embarked on his explanation of the expedient means chapter. And here we go, guys. Today, quite a few Buddhist terms are an inseparable part of our national language, but deplorably, all of them have acquired dangerously distorted connotations. Take, for example, the words expedient means. Listen to this carefully, everyone. People use it to mean a temporary expedient, as in saying a lie that is told as a temporary expedient may be justified. I must remind you that expedient means of the expedient means chapter carries an entirely different meaning than a little like lie to help you understand. It has a completely different meaning. The Buddhist term expedient means has nothing to do with telling a lie. All right? In Buddhism, there are three kinds of expedient means. And here we go, Nancy Hughes. This is talking about your question from on the Hoben and Juryo chapter from Volume 2 of the Writings of Nichiren Daishonin. I'll get back into that too later. In Buddhism, there are three kinds of expedient means. And I won't, I'll read the English because that's what's here, but then there's Himlo, Hoben, and all this other stuff. Adaptations of the law, expedient means. Expedient means that can lead one in, expedient means. And secret and wonderful, expedient means. All right? Adaptations of the law, expedient means, is an expedient used to inspire people to take faith in Buddhism. To inspire them. And it's an expedient. It's not the actual full-blown correct teaching, but it's something that's not a lie. It's something to help inspire them towards having a seeking spirit, right? Okay, that's that expedient means, the adaptations of the law. So it's a less than the perfect teaching way, okay, from the correct and equal and all those other sutras that, okay? Okay, then there's the expedient means that can lead one in, means refutation. The second stage in which the person is shocked to hear that what he has so far learned is not the correct teaching of Nichiren Buddhism. Okay? Many people think that they understood things that we might be saying here that I'm now clarifying from the source material that I'm using, that they would go, that isn't what I understood. Somebody from Nichiren Shu would say, I didn't understand that. Okay, Mr. Lee, who's been practicing, obviously, a more orthodox version of Mahayana Buddhism. Mr. Lee, bro, I could give you a kiss. Once again, these kinds of things. So that kind of expedient means would be to qualify and help bring them to the point of understanding this true truth. All right? And now the third kind is the most important one. It says, okay, expedient means that can lead one in, means refutation. The second stage in which the person is shocked to hear that what he has so far learned is not the correct teaching of Nichiren Buddhism. He will naturally ask, what is the correct teaching of Buddhism? Mr. Lee, as you actually are right now. The first two terms, now there are three, right? But the first two terms refer to preparatory means for leading people to the correct teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and are therefore used only in the pre-Lotus Sutra stage. To expound the Lotus Sutra, the means employed is the secret and wonderful expedient means, the third kind. Secret means it is known only to Buddhas. So if you haven't attained Buddhahood, you're repeating it without understanding its true meaning in the first place. But that's okay, because wonderful means that it's beyond the comprehension of a common mortal. Right? It's what's calling forth your Buddha nature without you understanding that's what you're doing. That's why we say nyoze, so nyoze, sho nyoze, tai, rather than so nyoze or ta, however you mix them up. My wife can do that, I can't do that. You can too. All right? So then he goes on. So does everybody with me? Mm-hmm. All right, so everybody with me? I'm supposed to look at the camera, right? What then is secret and wonderful? And by the way, if I don't look at the cameras, because generally I don't think about the cameras. What then is secret and wonderful? Well, the principle that a common mortal has the Buddha nature inherent in his life. This is secret and wonderful. This is certainly a revolutionary idea compared with the teachings of those expounded before the Lotus Sutra, which state that the Buddha and the people are separate entities. The Daishonin elaborates on secret and wonderful expedient means in the record of the orally transmitted teachings. He says, because the Lotus Sutra contains several parables to illustrate the secret and wonderful teaching. The participants, again, as President Toda is explaining all of this, don't forget this lecture I'm reading out loud. He's a retake of what he was saying to everybody that day. The participants felt themselves increasingly captivated by Toda's superb humor with which he told the story of the wealthy man and his poor son from the Belief and Understanding chapter of the Lotus Sutra, and the tale of the jewel in the robe in the 500 Disciples chapter. Through these parables, which I referred to before, and everybody knows that, right? You know what those two parables are. There's seven parables. Go look them up in the Buddhist dictionary. Again, this will expedite everything. You can speed read the Lotus Sutra if you know how to go about doing it through using this book. Okay, but go just look any of this stuff up. You can go read what it actually is if you don't understand it. It's basically saying that you already have been the Buddha all along, but just didn't understand it until the point in time you attained Buddhahood by virtue of the realization that you are and have already been always. Okay, that's what this is all about. From the poor man, the poor man and the wealthy man and the poor son, and the jewel and also the top knot, the whole thing. Through these parables, Toda successfully drove home to his audience the point that only the Buddha can truly penetrate the fate of one person, but that even ordinary people, if possessed of a righteous and powerful religion, can greatly improve their own destinies. Toda's words reminded the listeners of the inexplicable experiences they had undergone after their conversion. In other words, all the crazy, wild, mystic benefits that we all get that grab our attention so that we continue on and on and on to go and know and understand on a deeper and deeper level what it is we're actually doing. He continues, they could see that a change was taking place in their lives, as all of us should be too. At the same time, they found themselves envisioning unlimited possibilities in their futures, which all of you should too. After Toda's introductory remarks, Tame Izumida read the first sentence of the Expedient Means chapter, followed by its literal meaning. And I normally don't do gongyo with periods, so if I screw this up a little bit, excuse me. It says, Niji Seisan, Jusan Mai, Anjo Niki, Go Shari Hotsu, Shobu Chie, Jinji Muryo. It was the first time my wife heard me do gongyo. She goes, why do you just stop in the middle? Why you don't use any function? I'm going, because I'm saying shit, I have no idea what I'm saying. Okay, so now I know I am, right? And so what that translates to is, at that time, the world-honored one calmly arose from his samadhi, which is a deep contemplative, meditation, and addressed Shariputra, saying, the wisdom of the Buddhas is infinitely profound and immeasurable. Okay, so in introduction, chapter 1 of the Lotus Sutra, he's been in this trance. He's been in this meditation. And either Manjushri to Maitreya or Maitreya to Manjushri, I can't remember which one they're going, like what's going on. That's how the whole thing is introduced with the assembly and who all's there and what's going on. And it qualifies that the immeasurable meaning sutra has just been preached and he's been like contemplating, yada, yada, yada. That's how we begin. So really, Shakyamuni doesn't start talking in the Lotus Sutra until chapter 2. Okay? So, and that's where we are right now. Okay, so it continues on page 851. There was a hushed silence as the audience waited eagerly for the explanation of this familiar passage with which they began gongyo every morning and evening. Toda cleared his throat lightly. The sound reverberated with surprising resonance through the perfect stillness of the auditorium. President Toda continued, first of all, we need to know the exact definition of time, because the sutras assume widely differing meanings depending on how we interpret them. We invariably associate the word time, thank you, with such elements as noon and midnight or spring and autumn. When we think of time, that's how we think of time, right? But Buddhist time has nothing to do with a certain hour of the day or season of the year. So anytime we talk about time, like the selection of time, that whole Gosha that took like 3.5 or 4 hours for me to read, that's not time as it relates to time that as we think of it in a 24-hour day. What then is that time? Because they always say at that time, okay? What then is that time that is mentioned at the beginning, at the very beginning of the Expedient Means chapter, where he says, at that time the world-honored one calmly rose and addressed Shariputra, who is a voice hearer, right? He's not Maitreya or Manjushri. He's not a bodhisattva. Okay, do you understand the difference between voice hearers versus cause-awakened ones versus bodhisattvas, right? We'll get into it if you have a question. Let me just try to read through this. There's so much to try to understand. I'm sorry if I jump around. I'm just trying to make it clear. What then is that time that is mentioned at the very beginning of the Expedient Means chapter? Before considering this question, let us examine other sutras, because this is specific to the Lotus Sutra. Many scriptures contain a line to the effect that at one time the Buddha stayed at such and such a place and expounded such and such a sutra. In these cases, at one time is interpreted as once. This may remind you of some nursery tale, for instance, that one that begins, once upon a time, there was a tortoise and a hare. However, one time or once, as used in Buddhist scriptures, has no connection with the fairy tale timetable, once upon a time. All right? Buddhist time can be defined as that time when a Buddha makes his advent in this world in response to the request of those who yearn to be taught the law. In a sense, this principle applies to non-religious aspects of our life as well. But let me also qualify this to you, because this is something that you probably won't understand immediately until you've read it a few times. Buddhist time can be defined as that time when a Buddha makes his advent in this world in response to the request of those who yearn to be taught the law. Okay? So, at that time, that's referred to up here at the top, when I just read that, is the beginning. He's teaching the Lotus Sutra. Okay, but is he teaching the Lotus Sutra from chapter 1? He is teaching but what's this ultimately going to culminate in? The ceremony in the air, right? With the emergence of the treasure tower and his lifting up the assembly and all that, okay? And we've been told many times that the ceremony in the air is an assembly that has never ceased. It's eternal. It's continuously going on, right? Think about that, and then think about what he just describes here. Buddhist time can be defined as that time when a Buddha makes his advent, and when I point to myself, I'm pointing to myself because I do consider myself to be a Buddha. All right? Just like I consider you to be a Buddha, just like I consider you to be a Buddha. But I know what's in my mind. So I can speak for this point that I'm making. So in other words, the bottom line is that the Lotus Sutra is continuously being preached. Do you understand? It never is not being preached anywhere in the universe. All right? Nam-myoho Renge-kyo itself is an expression of the entire Lotus Sutra. Do you understand? Right. All right. So Buddhist time can be defined as that time when a Buddha makes his advent in this world in response to the request of those who yearn to be taught the law. That's why the Bodhisattvas of the earth manifest for the sake of teaching and preaching the law, making distinctions, right? In a sense, this principle applies to non-religious aspects of our life as well. A tradesman, shrewd enough to sense what commodity will be in demand, can enjoy a thriving business by manufacturing and selling quantities of that product. The same holds true with ideology. Even the greatest philosophy will not spread until the people are thirsty for someone to come and teach them. And when they are, someone appears to do that. And that's what's taking place right now with what we're doing. Now let us turn to the question, what is that time that appears at the outset of the Expedient Means chapter? Literally, it indicates the time when the first half of the Lotus Sutra was to be set forth. Toda laid aside the main subject for a while in order to explain the two ways of reading the sutras. This is all really important, and I'm sorry I'm going so slow, but you gotta understand this. There's two different ways to read or view the sutras. Toda laid aside the main subject for a while in order to explain the two ways of reading the sutras. A doctrinal interpretation, which clings to Shakyamuni's views, and the mind-observing interpretation, which analyzes the scriptures, which were originally expounded from someone other than the Daishonin, from the Daishonin standpoint. The Daishonin is the one that does that. Like, in other words, again, when he requalifies what's going on with great concentration and insight, what it means in the latter day when he talks about the 3,000 realms, which is in the Lotus Sutras from Tentai, all that kind of stuff. What he's talking about, mind-observing interpretation in the latter day is the Daishonin's Buddhism's sowing. And doctrinal interpretation is the historical context of the sutras based on a Shakyamuni understanding Buddhism harvest only. Do you understand? Everybody's with you. Do you understand the two different ways to read the other sutras? Okay? Okay. All right. Continuing then at the very bottom, page 851, President Toda, he invited the audience. And again, this is so important. You can see how many stars I have around this. I don't know if you grasped what I just said. It's very important that you try, because that will be the difference between you understanding what's being taught, thinking you understand, and actually understanding what it's really trying to teach you. He said, he invited the audience to challenge the limits of conventional Buddhist theories, which are exclusively based on a doctrinal interpretation. All right? So until the Daishonin and his teaching that's really recorded around the campfire and expressed as the orally transmitted teachings. I mean, there are other Nichiren schools. This is the one that Nikko took with him, that was expressed to Nikko in IKKO. Okay? So he says, which are exclusively based on a doctrinal interpretation, Shakyamuni. It was regrettable, he lamented, that modern society should be totally ignorant, because they're not aware of the teachings of Nichiren, of the indisputable validity of the Daishonin's teachings, the correct teaching of Buddhism of the future. So he's qualifying. Even the other Nichiren schools that don't have the OTT ain't got it right. You get it? Okay, so continuing. Viewed from the perspective of doctrine, that time indicates the time when people in the states of learning and realization are told for the first time that even they can attain Buddhahood. From the mind-observing standpoint, however, it signifies the latter day of the law. To be more specific, it is the time when the Buddha reveals that we can attain enlightenment in this world without discarding our lives as common mortals. Do you understand what that just said? That makes a huge clarification and distinction. Let me say it again. Viewed from the perspective of doctrine, okay, Shakyamuni's perspective, the historical way, the common way of viewing all of Shakyamuni's teachings, including the Lotus Sutra, that time indicates the time of teaching of the Buddhism harvest, right? Mm-hmm. Now, in the Buddhism harvest, when do you attain Buddhahood? At some freaking point way down the road. Mm-hmm. You know, all of that prophecies of enlightenment that's in the first 14 chapters, that's not going to happen in this lifetime for Maitreya, for any of those bodhisattvas, for any of them, right? That's all going to, okay. So, exactly. So, viewed from the perspective of doctrine, that time indicates the time when people in the states of learning and realization are told for the first time that they can attain Buddhahood, because that's when people of learning and realization are out there. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? We're already all Buddhas in the latter day. Mm. This is the former and the middle of the day. That's where learning and realization, those are Shakyamuni's disciples. Yeah, they're told for the first time. But we people that learn in the latter day, we are all original Buddhas. We're all Kuan Gongyo Buddhas, okay? So it doesn't apply to us the way it did for those that were being taught by Shakyamuni through the teachings of the former and the middle day, which include everything from Shakyamuni to Dengyo. So Tintai's in there, Myolo's in there. That's all stuff that we haven't expressed Nam Myoho Renge Kyo yet, the ultimate expedient. All right? You're with me, right? Okay. Yes. To be more specific, it is a time when the Buddha reveals that we can attain enlightenment. This is the Daishonin's teaching based on Tintai's clarification of theoretical Ichinen Sanzen. He shows us how to actual Ichinen Sanzen through Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Get it? Okay? We can attain enlightenment in this world without discarding our lives as common mortals, which the Lotus Sutra does not qualify a manner in which to actually accomplish that. Okay, continuing. At that time, from the Lotus Sutra, at that time, the world-honored one, from the Expedient Means chapter, at that time, the world-honored one calmly arose from his samadhi and addressed Shariputra. He says, let me elaborate on this phrase from both viewpoints. Okay? Okay, so again, this was the interpretation. Yes. Okay, he says, from both viewpoints, where I got lost. At that time, the world-honored one calmly arose from his samadhi and addressed Shariputra. Let me elaborate on this phrase from both viewpoints. The doctrinal interpretation goes as follows. That time represents the time when the first half of the Lotus Sutra is to be expounded, telling the people of the world of the two vehicles that they also can become Buddhas. At that time, the world-honored one, in this case, the transient Buddha, awoke and arose with utter calm from his meditation, his samadhi, that is a state of profound meditation on the law of the lotus. Then the Buddha spoke to Shariputra. Shakyamuni had 21 excellent disciples, of whom 10 were especially prominent. Shariputra, reputedly the wisest man in all India, was by far the most outstanding disciple. Toda dwelt at length on every important phrase so that the audience might have sufficient time to ponder and digest his explanations, which you're not getting from me just reading this. Okay, star, and everything's highlighted from here. Okay. Analyze this present Toda. Analyzed according to the mind-observing interpretation, the Daishonin is teaching us this. during the latter day of the law, using the same exact sentences, it's reinterpreted this way. During the latter day of the law, the world-honored one who embodies the supreme law hidden in the passages of the lifespan chapter, namely Nichiren Daishonin himself, calmly arises from the state in which his life has been one with the eternal life of the universe, which is exactly the relationship we have. He then addresses the Shariputra of the latter day, the wisest people of our time, us bodhisattvas of the earth. Who are the wisest? Surprisingly enough, the Daishonin tells us that we are. We are the original teachers. I just read it to you last week from point 3. That was the whole point. We are the original teachers of the law. We're the original teachers of the law of the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra. He actually says. He then addresses the Shariputra of the day, the wisest people of our time, us. Who are the wisest? Surprisingly enough, the Daishonin tells us that we are. Some of you may protest, saying that we can never be that wise. However, we are even wiser, theoretically at least, than Shariputra, the greatest of Shakyamuni's disciples, because we embrace the fundamental law of the universe. And that's all the OTT says over and over and over again. So this isn't President Toda's interpretation. This isn't my interpretation. This isn't I'm the Buddha self-embellishment. This is the teaching of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism sowing. He says, this is the principle of substituting faith for wisdom. For one who believes in the Gohonzon can gain wisdom as boundless as that of the Gohonzon, overshadowing even Shariputra. The only question then is the depth of your faith in the Gohonzon. Anyhow, please be reassured you are not as dumb as you may think you are. Toda's lectures are always much more than a mere interpretation of the scriptures. He would virtually plunge into the hearts of his audience. His burning conviction derived from his complete mastery of the Lotus Sutra penetrated his listeners' minds and opened their spiritual eyes, which had been blind. The wisdom of the Buddha, this is going back to the Lotus Sutra again, to the expedient means. The wisdom of the Buddha is infinitely profound and immeasurable. With this phrase, Shakyamuni began, on his own initiative, to praise the Buddhas for their wisdom. This process is called preaching without being asked, a rarely used method of the 9 or 12 different ways by which Shakyamuni expounded his sutras. Most scriptures start with a questioner expounding a question, or propounding a question, which is then followed by the Buddha's answer. The Buddha seldom sets forth doctrine of his own accord, because he's always trying to qualify things to answer the questions of the other people. Now he's come to a time where he's got to say what's got to be said, because it's time to say it at that time. Okay, it's now time for me to say the truth, and that's what he's qualifying. I have not yet revealed the truth. That's what he's about to say. You get it? Okay. The Buddha seldom sets forth doctrine of his own accord. He's always responding to questions, but nobody's got the Buddha mind to ask these questions. That's why he's got to qualify them without being asked. Do you understand? All right. The Buddha seldom sets forth doctrine of his own accord. In the sense of the expedient means chapter, however, he volunteered his teaching without being asked. This must have come as a surprise to the listeners, for Shariputra would later inquire of the Buddha why he began to praise the Buddhas for their wisdom without being asked to teach the law. And he says, the wisdom of the Buddhas is infinitely profound and immeasurable. This is the doctrinal interpretation. The wisdom of all the Buddhas, true wisdom, is infinitely profound because it penetrates the ultimate depths of all laws, and immeasurable because it covers the entire universe. Philosophers ponder their subjects in terms of both time and space, and Buddhism is no exception. The wisdom of the Buddhas is eternal in terms of time and unbounded in terms of space. Very important for you to also understand this. What did that just say? It's infinite in any manner in which you can conceive it. All right? In other words, it permeates infinite time and immeasurable space. What then is the wisdom that envelops eternity and the entire universe? From the mind observing standpoint, it is the wisdom of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Only this supreme wisdom is infinitely profound and immeasurable in the truest sense of the word. Why? Only this supreme, let me say it again. What then is the wisdom that envelops eternity and the entire universe? From the mind observing standpoint, from the standpoint of a bodhisattva of the earth, it is the wisdom of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Only this supreme wisdom is infinitely profound and immeasurable in the truest sense of the word. Why? As the original state, as absolute myo, it already contains everything.
Okay.
It contains everything. Everything, good, bad, indifferent, everything in the middle. Everything is already included in Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay, so the listeners who so often had been baffled by esoteric Buddhist language now felt as if the clouds had parted, revealing the true living significance of seemingly abstruse terms. The living significance. How we read this and view this is how we live in the latter day of the law as bodhisattvas into everyday life. This is how we get benefit. This is the function and the process and the purpose of us getting benefit. He says, this is where we gain our merit from this correct understanding. Why are we able to express that merit as benefit? Because we're trying to bring everybody along to understand as we understand. The listeners who so often had been baffled by esoteric Buddhist language now felt as if the clouds had parted, revealing the true living significance of seemingly abstruse terms. This was not merely because of Toda's skill in explaining the words and phrases. It was because of the sublime moment he had experienced in prison, a brilliant illumination that reached the deepest strata of the listeners' minds. Before the audience was aware of what was happening, this powerful light aroused the entity of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, dormant in the innermost recesses of their lives. Toda inspired this solemn process and did so with marvelous ease. What did that just say? The listeners, okay, now again, imagine you're all in the crowd, okay? You're a listener right now as this is expressed to you. Okay. The listeners who so often had been baffled by esoteric Buddhist language now felt as if the clouds had parted, revealing the true living significance of seemingly abstruse terms. This was not merely because of Toda's skill in explaining the words and phrases. It was because of the sublime moment that he had experienced in prison, a brilliant illumination that reached the deepest strata of his listeners' minds. Before the audience was aware of what was happening, this powerful light aroused the entity of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, dormant in the innermost recesses of their lives. Toda inspired this solemn process and did so with marvelous ease. What did he just talk about? He helped everybody that was there reconnect with their true identity. He helped them manifest and bring forth inherent wisdom that already exists within them. This is not something any of them are hearing for the first time or something any of them have experienced for the first time. Every freaking one of them is an original disciple. That's what he just said he did. He just wired them back up to the circuit, which is the reason for their advent in this world. That's why we read this the way we read it. That's why we're bodhisattvas of the earth. Okay? The other sect schools don't even think that that's... They're no bodhisattvas of the earth manifest. We're the only ones that perceive it this way. All right? He motioned to his assistant to continue. You're with me, right? Going on. Top of page 854. I'm going to kind of go over a little bit here. He motioned to his assistant to continue reading the next passage. As he listened, he sipped his water with an air of perfect composure. Go chie mon, nange nanyu, isa shouman, yakoshi butsu, shufu no chi. And again, this isn't the way I do gongyos. It's a little harder for me. The door, then this is what that means. That was a continuation of the sutra, and here's the translation. I keep trying to think interpretation. It's a translation. The door to this wisdom, Shakyamuni continues, the door to this wisdom, as he speaks to Shariputra, the door to this wisdom is difficult to understand and difficult to enter. Not one of the voice hearers or Prakyeka Buddhas is able to comprehend it. So he just qualified. Shariputra, you cannot understand what I'm saying. You're a voice hearer. All you cause awakened ones, you can't understand what I'm saying either. The only ones that can understand it are the Buddhists. But why did he leave out the Bodhisattvas? Because he's about to qualify that the Bodhisattvas are really Buddhists. They just don't know it yet in chapter 16. Okay? All right? Cause awakened ones and voice hearers, those those guys are right. They're from the former and the middle of the day. Those are Shakyamuni's disciples. Okay, so and so he says, okay. It is difficult, continuing President Toda, it is difficult to comprehend the wisdom of the Buddhas and even more so to enter the portals, Toda explained. Tiantai is very particular about the usage of these words. According to him, one cannot comprehend until he reaches the second 10 stages of the 52 Bodhisattva stages and cannot enter until he attains the fifth 10 stages. He himself admits the difficulty in the Makashikan, which was, only conveyed to people outside of his immediate disciples by Chang'an at the end of Chang'an's life. It is natural that because of this difficulty, Buddhism became a monopoly of the privileged minority, such as the nobility, and failed to save the suffering masses because it required such a devotion to master all the principles that were required to reach this. That's why Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is essential. It's necessary. None of us in the latter day could achieve Kosen Rufu if all of us had to master the entirety of the Buddhism of harvest before we could start to enjoy the benefit of Buddhism of sowing. Can you even imagine what that? No, we'll never get there. We'll be just like it's always been for these last 2,000 years. Kosen Rufu, as it relates to widespread propagation, can never occur if it's based on Buddhism of harvest. Period. All right? So he's saying, according to the Daishonen's teaching, the door to this wisdom, as Go Chie Mon, I assume, according to the Daishonen's teaching, the door to this wisdom indicates the door of faith. Because it's the door, it's faith which allows us to expedite the whole process by saying, okay, I'll believe what you're saying rather than having to every single point beat into me with me saying, okay, get it? All right. Faith is another concept that is difficult to understand and enter, because I can say faith and you can completely not understand what I really mean by faith. And that's it. You think you understand faith, so you stop right there. And every time you hear faith, rather than peering more deeply to understand it at its truer level, you keep superficially words on the surface, like the Lotus Sutra. We could just keep reading the surface words.
Like, I believe you.
I believe, exactly. Or
not faith,
expedient means as a little bit of a lie. It's a fairy tale. All those kinds of things. That's why the dictionary is so critical. You have no idea how many people I've had arguments with that really thought they understood what they were talking about, that didn't have a freaking idea what they really were saying. And they would just make up shit to coincide with what they had decided they understood. And I'd have to get into huge arguments with them, as Ari can tell you, on the internet, to qualify to them, no, best intention, I'm not putting you down. but you think you know what you don't know.
Right.
Everybody thinks they know what they don't know. Why? Because you've got to really study with a seeking spirit and without the attitude of arrogance that you understand anything. Okay? Mm-hmm. And you've got to constantly be going like, am I correct? And when shit goes south, that's the answer to your prayer, whether or not you're straightforward or not. Yes. There's no other way for the Gohonzon to get vocal cords and talk to you.
Yes.
It's real easy.
Oh my God.
Pain leads us to happiness. Pain tells us when we're making mistakes. It's like picking up a hot pan. Yeah, okay, I shouldn't pick up burning objects. It's not good for my skin. It's not good for my physical structure. We learn this way. Okay, it says, according to the Daishonin's teaching, the door to this wisdom indicates the door of faith. Faith is another concept that is difficult to understand and enter. Take, for instance, some of your friends whom you have been trying to convert. It is very hard for them to understand and join, because we all understand differently. We're going to say the same damn thing. All of us will understand it a little bit differently. Once they began to believe in the Gohonzon, however, once they begin to believe in the Gohonzon, however, they too will be able to change their faith into boundless wisdom. Hence the door of wisdom. Intelligent people. I have to read this. Intelligent people cannot understand the depths of Buddhism. I guess smart people only can. It's an inside joke. Intelligent people cannot understand the depths of Buddhism. And this is the truth. Because intelligent people always think they know what they don't know. Intelligent people cannot understand the depths of Buddhism. Yaku Shibutsu refers to the people in the state of realization. Those who belong to the world of learning, voice hearers, and realization, Prakyeka Buddhas, cannot reach the ultimate profundity of Buddhist philosophy because they think they already know what they don't know. Even Shariputra, a man of unrivaled wisdom, was told flatly by Shakyamuni that he would never attain wisdom, or attain enlightenment through wisdom alone. Viewed from the Daishonin standpoint, so it's not about wisdom for the sake of being I'm the wisest. It's wisdom that's transferable, the wisdom of all living beings. Viewed from the Daishonin standpoint, this phrase teaches that one will never understand. This is President Toda telling us this. Viewed from the Daishonin standpoint, this phrase teaches that one will never understand the correct teaching of Buddhism until he takes faith in it. So you will never get there by reading shit. All right? Faith is chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay? Today, the two vehicles indicate those who have acquired only a superficial knowledge of philosophy or science, but believe they know everything, and who think only of themselves. They're not really interested in Kosen-rufu. They're interested, they want the mind candy. They want the understanding for the sake of their own, invigoration. They're not doing it for the sake of teaching others, which is really the only reason Buddhas appear. Buddhas only appear to teach others. They don't do it for the praise. They don't do it for any other reason other than to make everyone equal to themselves. That's the only reason. But believe the intelligentsia come under this category. The Buddha declares that it is the most difficult to make such conceited people comprehend and enter Buddhism. Perhaps none of his contemporaries knew better than Toda the feelings of those intellectuals who turned a blind eye to the Buddhism of the latter day of the law. Nor was anyone so expert at giving life to even the shortest phrase of a sutra. Toda lived in the modern culture in every sense of the word. Contemporary scholars, he says, this is in quotation, contemporary scholars will never truly comprehend Buddhism as long as they believe that science can solve all problems. This is deplorable. Japan is far behind Western nations in scientific progress. So for some 80 years since the fall of the Tokugawa regime, it has devoted its energy and resources to the development of science. Today in our country, and again, this is Toda talking in the early 50s. Today in our country, as in other parts of the world, there is a conspicuous tendency to worship science as omnipotent. For this reason, the Japanese have neglected this great philosophy of life that was born in their own land. Let us take electricity as an example. It powers this microphone, that speaker, and countless other devices. Washing machines, television sets, and many other appliances have make every aspect of our daily lives more comfortable and pleasant than ever before, to the point that I would say I want no more new inventions. Higher civilization is supposed to bring people greater happiness, but many people feel miserable and unhappy if they cannot afford some new wonderful product while their neighbors can. There are also demonic inventions, atomic and hydrogen bombs. They are adding to the already sufficient miseries of humankind. I am in no way opposed to the advances of science. On the contrary, I approve. However, I emphatically deny that man's happiness increases in direct proportion to scientific progress. Some sensible people have begun to feel as I do, but they have no idea how to cope with the current situation. Just ask yourself if you are happier than farmers who lived some 200 years ago. When you take a taxi, you feel a knife in your heart every time that merciless meter clicks out an additional fare. When you travel by air, you worry throughout the journey over a possible accident. If you are that afraid of a crash, you should not fly at all. The telephone is a convenient device, but you had better be careful when you put through a long-distance call. The charges are so exorbitant that you could jump out of your skin. The participants burst out laughing. When people laugh, they are completely off guard. Laughter softens their hearts and helps them accept what they hear. Knowing all the delicate intricacies of human emotions, Toda always succeeded in making himself understood. We cannot obtain genuine happiness until we discern and embrace the true philosophy of life. For practical purposes, this philosophy is embodied in the form of the Gohonzon. So only through fusing with the Gohonzon can we attain absolute happiness. Those who disregard this principle in their blind pursuit of science and learning correspond to the intelligent people whom the Buddha so strongly denounces in the phrase, not one of the voice hearers or Prakyeka Buddhas is able to comprehend it. They are revering science and learning as their highest objects of devotion. Hence, they suffer constantly from unhappiness. Some say religion is the last thing on which I would depend. Others complain, I am too shy to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo out loud. Pardon me. I am sure some of you used to say these things. I have a friend who is a popular writer. A few years back, one of his children fell seriously ill, and the doctor gave him no hope of recovery. As a final resort, my friend came to consult me. I told him, embrace the Gohonzon in earnest. Following my advice, he began to do gongyo, locking himself in his study so that no one else would see. This example shows how difficult it is for those in the worlds of learning and realization to comprehend the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. The more argumentative people are, the less capable they are of understanding the correct teaching of Buddhism. Keep this always in mind. If the people you are trying to convert belong to this category, remember the phrase from the Expedient Means chapter and teach them calmly and patiently, because they're not going to get it based on their own karma. Even if they refuse to take faith, control your temper and don't threaten them senselessly by saying such thing as, you'll be punished if you don't take faith. That's not necessary. And I'll stop there and continue on page 856 next week with proceeding on his with his lecture on the Expedient Means chapter in this relaxed manner. Thank you, and talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you.